Aaron, thank you so much for joining us. Our audience is going to be very intrigued with your observations starting from childhood, being with friends who took very different directions, and you have some great insights into family, business, and what the correlation is. But Aaron, thanks for joining us. Our listeners are going to gain a lot from your insights.
Thanks a lot, Ron and Marty, for having me. I'm looking forward to this. It'll be fun.
Aaron, describe to us a little bit of your past, the friends you had, and your observations of how the intervening time went and the different directions that people chose to go.
Yeah, so I grew up in a neighborhood with about 10 guys at about the same age. We played a lot of sports together, played games. We were in the same church, we're in the same scout programs, went to the same high school. Socioeconomically, we were all in the same place, so this is where you're like, oh, we're all going to end up in the same place. And then, as I got older, when I was about 19, my best friend's parents got divorced. And then a few years later, another of my good friend's parents got divorced. And it was like, okay, things are changed. That's just the new world we're in. And then I would say it was about 10 years ago now, I got maybe a little more, I'm trying to remember exactly when, but I got an email from my mom and she said, here's this, I got it and I read this article and it was about this guy who was going to prison for rape and attempted murder. And I was like, oh, it's good for those people to be in prison. I don't like them. And then I looked at the name and I said, holy crap, this is one of the guys who was in my groups. I played sports with him. I'm like, I knew him. We were so on the same trajectory. And then I was like, well, where did we diverge? What happened? Because at that point, I had 4 kids, was doing relatively well at work. And I just looked at that going, how did this occur? What was the big divergence? And I mean, as a father, my role I felt was to protect my kids. And I was going, if I don't know what happened to him, I can't protect my kids from it happening to them. So that's kind of how I got on this path of figuring out the dynamics of family.
So now you've got us held in suspense. What was your conclusion, if you had that, or were you able to reach a conclusion? Why such a radical difference in what seemed to be just a very common friendship in childhood?
Yeah, I mean, it's always hard and there's so many relationship things that can affect him. But in his case, it seemed like he was very involved in athletics, got involved in some drugs, and then also had this group when you play football, often there's a group of people. I mean, there were people on the football team. One of the reasons I didn't play my senior year, there was a guy who had come from one of the islands. I think he was Tongan, and he had been moved because he was involved in a lot of gang activity. So a lot of times you get involved in these bad social groups, and then they kind of in business, we call it a death spiral, right? You make bad decisions and then causes you to make more bad decisions. And that's kind of what I saw, was this reinforcement of you get involved with bad people and then they introduce you to more bad people and more bad things. And this just kind of escalates until, he was on drugs. I think he was on some work program when he actually, like trying to rehabilitate him, when he actually ended up getting, hurting that girl and almost killing her. So that was where I see it, as like, it was the friend groups that he was around that had big influence. And then some of the things in his family culture wasn't as strong.
And that's a very interesting observation that Marty and I perceive, and while we know it to be values, we rely a lot on values. And one of the aspects of this podcast, Aaron, is that we want to encourage people to be aware of and feel that we can effectively intervene with, not in a judgmental way, but if we just pick up on, I sometimes use the term various clues, data points. A lot of that has to do with the friends we keep. A lot of that has to do with where we spend time reading and listening to and so forth. And I use the term, and Aaron, I'm more interested in your insights, but sometimes we mask the things underneath that are really defining characteristics. And I think it's incumbent on us to be aware of some of those data points. But Aaron, I don't know that anything that I just said resonates with you, but our listeners are very interested in your insights.
Yeah. When you talk about masking, I think we've ended up with our society has turned a lot of emotions into negative things, right? Oh, you have too much energy, you have ADHD. You're not feeling great about yourself, you're depressed. Now let's give you medication so you don't feel that way. And then you look a step further and you're like, well, why are you depressed? Well, I'm not doing anything interesting in my life and I don't have good friends. Well, you should be depressed. That's your body trying to give you this signal. And a lot of what I've seen, the mentality recently seems like it'd be like driving down the road in a car and the gasoline, low gas stick buttons pops up and you're like, oh, I'm low on fuel. Let me put a sticker over that. Well, that's not going to help you. The problem is going to happen. It's just a matter of now you don't see it. And it seems like in our society, we're trying to put a lot of stickers over all the warning lights that our body is trying to send to us. So sometimes when we feel lonely, the reason you feel lonely is because you have no friends. Maybe you need to invest in friends. Maybe you need to invest in serving other people so that you have a friend group. Maybe you feel like you're languishing and you feel tired and you feel depressed because you're not sleeping well or eating well, right? There's so many of these underlying signals that we've now said, well, we don't want you to feel that way. Well, the feeling isn't the problem, to your point. We're just masking. We're putting stickers over all these things. Well, you're not a bad person. No one wants to date you. Well, why is that? Like, what is the insight? Everyone wants to marry the best person they can, but then very rarely are they like, am I the best person that other person would want to marry? So a lot of it's kind of this introspection. And now we've come to any uncomfortable emotion has just been turned into something to treat. And I don't like to prescribe negative motives, but I just see it like the drug companies are, okay, now you're on this drug for the rest of your life. And then you have all these weird side effects that are coming from that. And it's like, just like with your car, okay, you run your car out of gas, then you're going to have a lot of other problems. You run your car out of oil, you're going to probably blow the whole thing up, which my wife did, sadly.
Oh my gosh.
Yeah. At one point. So that's the kind of stuff where it's like, pay attention to what your body's telling you. And I think often women are a little better at like paying attention to, well, I know something's wrong. I may not know exactly right, especially in relationships. And then you go, okay, why are we having this friction? Well, I'm not investing in the relationship. I'm trying to just make money and I'm neglecting my wife. I'm neglecting my children. Oh, that's what this is coming from. So to me, it's a lot about paying attention to our own signals. And if we're married, especially to the signals of our spouse as well, like there will be conflicts and sometimes there's like an explosion, but usually there's this underlying issue that we need to take care of. And once we take care of it, then we can go on our way. But if we don't, then it just kind of grows and grows until sadly, like my car ended up seizing up the engine and not functioning at all.
No, you've got some very interesting life insights. A lot of things that I think we can unwrap and build on. The pandemic, COVID, has caused a lot of isolation, and the isolation has, for some people, caused depression and separation, all number of things. And these are the things we're trying to encourage people to become aware of, to be involved in other people's lives. Aaron, without trying to be morbid, I'd rather be, let's just say, I would rather apologize than eulogize, meaning I would rather apologize if I misassessed something than to dismiss it and think back, I could see this coming on. I just did not have the courage, the whatever, to get involved. One of the aspects of this podcast is, Aaron, to get involved in people's lives, feel that we are equipped. We are together. That's one of the very operative terms of this podcast. We're with people. We're together. We want to help encourage people to be aware of, have the courage to engage in other people's lives, but we'd also like to encourage those who may be going through stuff to just feel that the someone is a safe space to divulge. I'm talking too much, Aaron. You've got the great insights.
Well, yeah, I can talk about, like, you're talking about what I refer to in the book as social resources, right? This is this thing of we are humans. We need people around us. We need to have these social resources and connections. And if we don't invest in those connections, we won't have them. I mean, to give you an example, I've had what I consider the three hells in my own life. The first was when my wife and I decided to, instead of me, when I finished an MBA, instead of going and following a job and then buying a house, we decided, since she was teaching Irish dance in Utah, she was the only certified teacher at the time, that we would buy a house and build a studio behind it. Well, over the course of those 3 years, it was very difficult for me to find a job, and I didn't have as much flexibility because I had to be restricted in my location looking. And so there was all this, like, how am I going to do this? And financial stress. I had 2 children at the time. And it was this constant day in. I'm applying for jobs. I'm looking for things. I had close relatives tell my wife she should divorce me at one time. Right. So it was this whole matter of, like, I'm doing everything I can. I had over the course of those 3 years, I was unemployed for about 18 months. Some of it was because we were investing. Like, this is the nature of entrepreneurship, right? It's like, it's going to suck, but being in the suck really hurts. And so that's where having, my parents lived 20 minutes away. So they'd come talk. My dad had come talk to me, look at options. I had people who would, come help me. But it was that social connections that, especially with my wife and her being like, we're not giving up here, that ultimately pulled me through that one. And then I got a job, did really well. And then I was like, okay, we have money. The business was going well. The entrepreneur, you're like, hey, things are going good. I had another job. So we were making good money. And then we were like, hey, let's invest in real estate. That was about 2007. So 2008 hit, the whole thing bottomed out and ended up losing about $250,000. And I was like, wow, it sucked really bad from about 2003 to 2006. And then we were getting on track. And then, wow, we just lost this. And I was so angry. And again, it was my dad and some of my social connections who were like, yeah, you'll get through it. We'll get through it. My wife was like, we'll get through this together. But I did realize about myself, like, I want to take risks in my business life as an entrepreneur. I don't want to. So then my wife and I decided we're going to pay off all our debt. We're going to get out of debt. And so over the course of the next 7 or 8 years, we paid off about $350,000 in debt. So our home was paid off. Our cars were paid off. This mistake that I had made, learning opportunity, as I like to call it, was paid off. And then that allowed me to take on more riskier companies. And then if there was places when you're doing risky things in business, the odds are high that they're not going to work out, the first one or the second one you try. So it took me a number of times, but then I got connected to a friend, again, the social connection. I'd known him for 13 years from my church. And he was like, hey, you want to come work for me? I'm like, all right. We know each other. We know we had a good match. And so I started with about 20 people there. And then over the course of the next 4 years, we grew the company to about 180 people. And then we took $54 million in financing from private equity, which then gave me some time to step back. But during that one actually is my third hell, when I got audited by the IRS, which is horrible because my brain is just like super creative. What are all the ways my life could be screwed over and all the negative? And that lasted for 3 or 4 months. And again, it was friends of mine I would talk to, my family, hooked up with my accounting friend. And he was like, oh, I got this. We can take care of it. But it's those type of things where you're going through those difficult circumstances. And if you do not have those social resources, it's very difficult. And you see a lot of people, they'll take their own lives sometimes because they don't have the support. So that's the stuff that I look at. Like, you need those social connections in your life, and you need to invest in those connections, whether it needs to be your spouse for sure, but you need other men, I feel like, for men around you to support you. Because I kind of look back at all those experiences, and financially, I didn't actually need help through any of them. it was just the load and the mental pressure of me being the dad and the protector and going through all these negative things and trying to get out of these very bad emotional states.
You have been through a lot of highs and lows. I picked up on that very easily in just the last 2 minutes. You mentioned your book, The Family Flywheel, and the family part of it. I can pretty clearly understand that part. What is the significance of the flywheel?
So I did mechanical engineering when I was in college. So I definitely think through these things as an engineer. I like to figure out how everything works. So a flywheel in the mechanical engineering world is something that you get going and it has momentum, and then it keeps going and gains more and more speed. You see this in a business world where you talk about, like a company like Google. I think in 2000 it was worth $1 million. Now 20 years later it's worth 1.5 trillion or whatever it is, right? You see it with companies like Walmart. They took them 20 years to build their first 1,000 stores, and then in 1 year they built 1,200 stores, right? So this is where you see this flywheel effect. It's very common in the financial world with compound interest, right? Where you make money and then the money makes money, and then you make money off the money that made money. That's the flywheel effect in the financial. But there's also the side in the social, right? The more people you connect with and you serve, then the more people are going to introduce you to more people. Good people beget good people. And then there's a case too where the more you learn, the faster you get at learning, the more interested you are in learning. You talk a lot, Ron, about how you're really curious, right? I never hit a point when I start to dive in where I'm like, oh, I've now I know everything about it. It's like, oh, geez, now I could just go read more and more books, and now I could go talk to more and more people. So this is the flywheel effect that you get in the human resource part. And so that's the side where I think it's really, if we understand the flywheel effect, and that's really based on our decisions, right? In the business world, we call that the business model. The business model is really the engine, and the resources, the lots of money, lots of friends, good health, abilities, and those type of things, those are the outputs of the engine. So that's the interesting thing that I've seen is a lot of people will be like, I want to be rich. What does that have to do with anything? You want to, instead of thinking you want to be rich, do you want to generate a lot of wealth, right? It's different of like, if you want a lot of money, go win the lottery, and then you can screw your life up like most people do, right? I mean, there's a sad story. There was a man locally, he built a very successful company, ended up, I think he had a heart attack or something, passed away, but his insurance policy gave all of his children about $20 million, and his wife, I think it was 100. So he has this 18-year-old daughter who was given $20 million. By all accounts, she was rich. But you look at her now, we're like, I think 15 years out, she's been through, I think 4 or 5 marriages. She's she's bought companies and sold them and messed them up because she doesn't know how to run them. So you look at this, like being rich doesn't actually make you happy. I think in her case, sadly, being given those resources probably hurt her happiness, her overall well-being, and her development more than her not having those resources.
No, you are right on. And flywheel, momentum. Yes, I'm an aerospace engineer. I know what you're saying. I know what you're talking about. And just very briefly, I'm an Air Force fighter pilot, so I know when you gain a lot of speed, you got a lot of momentum, and you're going in a direction, but you got to make sure that the direction you're going in is right. And now I want to get back to the fundamentals that you got to be grounded in the right principles, the right values to make sure that the direction you're going is the right direction. And if it's not, you got to do whatever you have to do to reorient the momentum, the direction you're going. But I think, Aaron, from my perspective and a lot of your life background as I'm learning, you've got to be discerning of the way things are in an aviation sense. We call it situational awareness. I have to be aware of everything around me so that I am fully aware of the decisions I make. But everything you're saying, Aaron, is so applicable to life, business, everything together, the values and situational awareness.
Yeah, no, I'll be honest, I'm a little jealous. I did consider going into the Air Force. I wanted to fly fighter pilot. I'd be a fighter pilot. I'm 6'4", so I was like, I'm a little tall to fit into, I think, most of the cockpits. But yeah, I loved the military for that. And I talk about that specific. That's one of the strategies that people can use in their family business model. Well, if you go into the military, though, it's a lot of sacrifice, right? It's a lot of time. You don't get to control where you live often. So there's these things of, what is the structure, as I call it? Are you gonna get married early, go into the military? And then the last one is, what is your culture? I've been so impressed with the people in the military. They can somehow take these very undisciplined boys often and then turn them into just scarily disciplined people. I'm like, okay, that guy could kill me in a lot of ways. So, but it's this very, like, they have the discipline. Like, I know how to work together as a team. So the military is so good at developing teamwork, developing skills, having a sense of purpose, like you're saying, on a mission. And that's really where I think for a lot of people, it's really beneficial to go into the military if your culture is not strong. And there's actually some cool things. I had a friend who went into the military. He wanted to be a doctor. So he had the military pay for all his schooling. Then he served in the military for 4 or 8 years. And then he came out of the military with no debt and a medical degree. And I'm like, there's so many cool options that the military can provide. That's why I talk about it. It's one of the, what I call careers that you can take, because it can provide so many resources and connections. And there is we call it in marketing, the halo effect. If you serve in the military, at least for me and a lot of people, you're like, okay, this guy's gonna, A, I can trust him, and B, he's gonna get crap done, right? So that's this interesting thing where the military can take people who are very undisciplined, give them this a lot of the cultural values. I mean, there's some things that, I have to be careful with, it seems like, with alcohol and some of the drug abuse occasionally. But overall, the military is like really good at helping people learn very good cultural elements, values, beliefs, and teach them really valuable skills for life.
No, you're right on. One of the great things about the military is teamwork. In some cases, literally, our trust, the way we communicate, can be literally a matter of whether we live the next day or not. And so I'm no attempt to be dramatic about what I'm saying, but I will tell you from an aviation perspective, a fighter pilot, we would always fly, or frequently in a flight of 4, and whether we return with the same 4 has a lot to do with communication. It's the way we trust each other. We can't second guess each other when we have just a matter of a few seconds to react on. We have to know what we heard, react to what we heard, trust in the person who made the statement. All of those, I think, are business principles, family principles that everybody wants to belong. You very definitely alluded to connected relationships. We need it, we want it, and we want to be able to trust in each other. Marty and I did a podcast just a couple of days ago about trust. Marty and I are totally different the way we, based on our personalities, and trust. I want to trust people, so I'll assign you, Aaron, a 10 on a 10-point scale right away. Marty's saying, well, not so fast. It may take 6 months for me to learn you, for you to earn your trust. But those are just some of the dynamics we work with. And Aaron, what I'm hearing you say is the family, business, we've got to know each other so that we adapt to each other.
Yeah, this is one of the most important things. So that you have each family has a business model, the strategy, structure, and culture that they're with. But if you look at it, when you get a co-founder in the business world or a spouse in the family world, you got to have the same values, you need to have the same structure, and you need to have a common direction. And it feels like a lot of people now aren't really good in their, they're trying to marry someone who's just like them. But if you look at the business world, if I'm good at marketing, I don't want to hire and I don't want to get another co-founder who's a marketer. I want to go get someone who's like a product person, right? I want complementary skills in a business, and you want that in your marriage too, right? It's great that I do all the technical stuff for my wife's Irish dance school, and she does all the teaching. I have no idea how to do any of that, and in fact, she's like, "You should learn." I'm like, "Nope," because then you would make me teach, right? But she doesn't like the technical stuff either. So this complementary thing makes for, this is where synergy, right? Together, we're actually better. And that's where I think most people need to look at. Stop with the, hey, you need to do 50% of the work, or you need to do 50% of this. It's like, no, we have different roles and we're both going to go 100% at those roles. Right. And it's the same when you look in the military, you're like, yes, you have the generals, or the admirals, right? You have this whole chain of command and they all have different responsibilities and they all need to play those responsibilities well, or people die. And it's not like, is one better? Well, the admiral, we've shown he can take a lot of the trust, and we can trust him through multiple decisions down the chain. So that's where I think it's the same in our families. We have to be able to trust and go, okay, you know what the kids need because you've been focused on that. I know how I'm working on my career, or however that works out. We're working together and we need to trust each other. And then there's a side too where you'll see it in companies sometimes where the sales team hates the product team, right? Those stupid guys, they can't build anything good. And then why can't they sell it? We keep giving them. And it's like, that's dysfunctional. Just like in a marriage, you have to appreciate the other people. Salespeople suck at writing code and coders suck at selling, right? So let's appreciate it. And it's funny because I've seen a lot of my daughter who's married. She's like, man, my husband, he just doesn't care about his health as much as I do. I'm like, yeah, isn't it great? So you focus on the health of the family, keep the family alive, take care of the medical stuff. That's the HR department, right? You're the HR department of your family, and he'll go work in a different department. You don't want him to be in the same department. So sometimes feels like a lot of kids nowadays are trying to get, I want to get someone, I'm making a lot of money. I want to make someone, marry someone who's also making a lot of money and focused on their career. Well, who the crap is doing the rest of life? Who's taking care of the kids? Who's, dealing with the issues of insurance and taxes and all this garbage that we have to do with life? And that's where it's so good when it's complementary and you go, I appreciate what you're doing because I see the value. And that's kind of why I wrote the book, was to help expand. I think a lot of times people are focused just on the financial resource. Well, I went and I made money. I'm an asset to the family. Whereas my wife, she may have gone, done some service in the church and built up those social relationships. But I didn't have language to talk about that. So I'm like, well, what did you do? Well, you went and hung out with some women? Well, whatever. That sounds great. And I had to go work my butt off. I'm so much better. But they were both investing. And one of the stories I like to talk about that I think illustrates this really well is actually Bill Gates' mother, Mary Gates. She was a school teacher. Her husband was a lawyer. They got married. They had 3 kids. And then she stopped teaching school so she could focus on the family. The kids got a little older. And then instead of going back to work, she started to volunteer. So she was on the board of the University of Washington, and she was on the board of United Way. Well, one of the other people who happened to be on the board of United Way was the CEO of IBM. Well, that was one of the connections that made Bill Gates. That was the early connection that was important for Microsoft. So now you look at her connection. Was that $100 billion connection that she made because of her service? I think at the time, it wasn't viewed as an investment in social relationships for her. But the reality is, without that, Bill Gates, we may not even know him. And so that's the stuff when you look in the family. I think the women have done a lot of stuff historically that has been, we didn't have a language to talk about it. So we're like, well, you went and hung out with women, or you went and took care of the kids' health. It's not as important as my stuff. But the reality is, especially in Bill Gates' story, what she did was probably more important than what the dad did for his success. And I've seen that with my own life as well. My mom serves in the community, and it's been like a lot of the jobs I got when I was young were because, oh, I have a friend who needs this done. Oh, I have a friend. She had this massive network. My dad would sit down and study Hebrew and Greek, He didn't love people as much unless he had something to talk with them. But my mom was a massive server and connector. And it was interesting because when I got married, there was like 400 people who showed up when I had my reception. And I was like, who are you people? I've never met you in my life. This is my wedding. It's about me and my wife. Why are you here? That's how I was thinking. And then they'd say, oh, your mom, she helped my son get his Eagle Scout. Oh, your mom, she helped us when my daughter got cancer. Oh, your mom. And I'm like, oh, you're not here for me. You're here for my mom. But then all those people would be saying, hey, do you need any help with anything? How can I help you? If you need getting a job, what are you studying? What is your wife doing? You need any help with anything? And then they gave us presents. So that's where I see the social connections. If we have them, they're so important to the fabric of our society even. And if we don't have them, we're going to have mental health issues, and we're also going to feel very lonely. And I think based on the evidence I've seen, you'll actually be less financially successful if you don't invest in those relationships.
Totally, radically agree with everything you're saying. Several topics came to mind, and Aaron, I'm not going to have you commit on the podcast, but I can see the possibility, the likelihood of several topics come up for further podcasts that our listening audience needs. I see a very definite parallel in family, in business, in not only values, but in the context of relationship. I need the right person who will complement me for my lifetime partner, which for me is Marty. She's been my lifetime partner for 54 years, and we're maybe halfway there. The other part is, I believe, and here's where I'm going to believe, Aaron, you've got a lot of expertise. I'm not convinced we really know how to interview, to have the right people to bring on the team, to build the team we need. Hey, I need somebody who's radically different from me, because this person has perhaps the analytical skills or whatever it may be. But Aaron, I'm mentioning that as possible topics for follow-on podcasts. I guess I am going to ask you, would you consider coming on for additional podcasts? Because I can see a lot of topics our listeners can benefit from your life expertise.
Sure. Yeah, I think it'd be fun.
I do as well. And I think that there's a lot we can build on for team building, and just some ways where we can help just build the capabilities, let's just say we need to interact more to watch each other, to make sure that as much as we can, I'm going to go back to the very beginning premise that you had a bunch of you as kids who you had reason to believe we're all going to go off in the same direction, but radically took different directions. Maybe we can identify early on some of those skills, values we're looking for, and help develop people to become effectively involved, to have those connected relationships. Aaron, thank you for sharing your life to this point. We look forward to continuing this adventure with you.
Yep. Thanks a lot, Ron. Thanks, Marty. It was a lot of fun.